I know Douglas, and I think that I've always gotten along with him, and I think that he's clever. But he's clever in a boarding school way. He went to boarding school,
right,
as I did, and you instantly recognize it in the way that he debates, which is by dropping references that suggest deep erudition that doesn't actually exist.
No,
did you pay Douglas to do that?
I did not. I don't have that type of money.
Did he throw the fight on purpose?
I wish I had that. I'm doing okay. I don't have money like that. I don't have buy off Douglas Murray money. I think he's getting.
I don't think it would take too much.
Well,
are we ever going to see the end of this beef between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray, man? You go what I'm saying? Because if you don't remember, Dave Smith and Douglas Murray, they were on the Joe Rogan podcast and they went back and forth.
You're not answering my question. You're continuing to cite
I'm getting
very
there.
right-wing Israeli politicians. But what do you
I'm getting
think
there.
is the reason?
I'm getting there. I'm saying, so I think they disengaged in order to kill the peace process. I think they put the full blockade around the country for the reason that they've always kind of done it there, that, yeah, they don't want too much stuff getting in. They want to keep them, as they put it, on a diet, and they don't want rockets to fly into Israel.
And in my opinion, Dave Smith ate Douglas Murray's lunch. You know what I'm saying? He embarrassed him in that conversation. And this was a conversation, obviously, of Israel-Gaza. Dave Smith embarrassed him, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? Now, obviously, since then, both parties have gone on different platforms and everything, talking about it. Obviously, everybody want to talk to Dave Smith right now because people just want to get, wow, like, how was it? What happened behind the scenes and everything, right? Now, he came on the Tucker Carlson podcast. They had different conversations, and this was the conversation that it started with, actually. And I would say, for throughout the episode, I believe it was 2 hours long, it was littered with shots here and there. You go, I mean, whether for Dave, for Ben Shapiro, for Matt Walsh, whoever wanted, they can get it. But let's check out this video and react to it.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think essentially it was what everyone saw. It was it's like my first impression of it. My impression during the first half hour of the debate, I was like, well, Douglas just embarrassed himself in front of the world. And
you felt that in real time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it was, look, he was ridiculous.
Ooh.
And it was kind of strange to witness as it was happening. I go, so you decided to open the debate by just chastising everyone as not being as good as you, that the expert class ought to be the ones consulted, that you could argue what exactly he was saying, but he was clearly saying that you guys on podcasts are simply not qualified to talk about these subjects. Now, you're saying this on the Joe Rogan Experience. Of all places to go and deliver this message, this is the place guaranteed to turn the entire audience against you. And of course, I just think that I think it's a ridiculous non-argument that never would have made sense. But coming off of the COVID years, the idea that you're going to convince people that you ought to kind of
the expats were the ones lying to us during COVID. The so-called expats that Douglas Murray is caping for. These are the same ones that were lying to us during COVID. These were the same ones that lied to us and led us into war in the Middle East for the last 20 years. The same so-called experts.
They ought to trust your opinions. They ought to, that your class ought to be trusted. Was a ridiculous,
but he's not even
attempt.
in that class. I mean, he's
no,
not.
He's not.
I know Douglas, and I think that I've always gotten along with him, and I think that he's clever. But he's clever in a boarding school way. He went to boarding school,
right,
as I did, and you instantly recognize it in the way that he debates, which is by dropping references that suggest deep erudition that doesn't actually exist. I think he's clever. He's got a kind of bullshitty boarding school vibe to him, again,
yes,
that I recognize, that I have sometimes.
Right.
So I'm not, not trying to be holier than thou, but like the idea that he's an expert is absurd.
Damn.
He's a journalist like the rest of us who's been taken on PR tours in various countries by their governments trying to win his support. Got it. I've done that too. But he's hardly an expert on anything.
Damn.
Well,
So
right.
like, what?
Well, also, it doesn't, look, all of this, So the analogy that
and it's so funny that Douglas Murray was saying that. Yeah, well, everybody knows that he studied English in uni. Like, bro, you are not some sort of like war expert or political expert, whatever the case is, bro. You studied English, bro. That shit was crazy to listen to. I was watching it in real time, and I felt exactly the same way, bro.
I've used about it is that like if you had two UFC fighters that are going to fight, so they've signed the contract, they've done their training camps, they show up to Madison Square Garden, they both get in the octagon, and like one of them puts up his hands, and then the other one puts his hands down and goes, you know, I'm such a better fighter than you. And this is ridiculous that me and you are even fighting. It's like, oh, okay, but we are.
Show me.
But we are. We're here.
Up for it.
Right. We both accepted. We're both here. So if you are such a better fighter, if you have trained so much more, if you have all these advantages against me,
show me.
Well, then you can't just you have to demonstrate that. Take on the argument. You should be able to then destroy me. And so he weirdly opened with this thing where he was going to turn everybody off, turn everyone against it, because the style is bullshit. Even if you're, and I've had lots of people who are pro-Israel reach out to me since then and be like, listen, I disagree with you on the issue, but that was ridiculous, the way he attempted to argue. Because weirdly, number one, you're turning everyone against you. And number two, you're just setting the bar so much higher for yourself. Because now once we start actually getting into the debate, you've already explained that you should be dominating me on every facet of this. And yet you're not. And yet actually when it comes down to it, you have no answer for the points that I'm making. And that was the theme of,
and no
of the
deep
entire
knowledge either.
Yes, that's right. But there were 2 points in the debate that actually stuck out to me the most. And it wasn't the have you been, which is, you know, was the funniest thing that everyone's made.
Have you been to Israel? Really? You haven't been to Israel. You cannot speak about a place that you've never been to.
Making that, you know, Douglas will be mocked for eternity for, but, you know, he made his own bed. But the 2 points to me that really stuck out in the debate, because this is the way my mind works, is that I'm like, oh, if you like, give me something, give me something to challenge me on. That will actually keep me up at night, by the way. If you were to be like, no, Dave, you got this completely wrong, and you need to read these 3 books to understand why you're missing all this information.
Can I interrupt and say, knowing you pretty well, I think, I mean this, I believe, I would take a lie detector test and pass. I believe that if you read those books and found that you were wrong, that you would admit it.
Oh, yeah. And I've done this lots of times before. I have views from a decade ago that are quite embarrassing in hindsight. I was an atheist at one point. I was pro-life. I was pro-choice at one point. Oh God, this is bad. I was up for open borders at one point.
I've had all of those views.
I've had some really bad views over the years, and I've changed my mind.
Do you think Douglas would admit if he was wrong?
Well, of course not. I mean, that's obvious,
so that's
right?
No, but that's kind of the acid
test,
test,
look, if you can get Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, and COVID wrong, and then with certainty say you're right about the next one, and then also arguing that the other person should have some humility. I mean, come on. Like, what is this? So it's just too, you couldn't write, if I just scripted this for you and wrote it on a script, you'd be like, take it down. And this is too ridiculous. No one would believe this. But regardless of that, so there were 2 moments that actually really stood out to me in the debate. Were, okay, so number 1 was in the Ukraine portion. Number 2 was in the Israel portion. So in the Ukraine portion, at one point, I said to him, we were talking about the, what led up to the war. And so he said something like, he goes, the real question is why all these countries wanted to join NATO. I mean, we didn't incorporate them in NATO through force. And I was like, well, yes, obviously that's the argument, isn't that we forced, the governments willingly wanted to join NATO.
Yes.
I was like, that's pretty obvious why. You'd want to be have your defense subsidized and want to have the most powerful government in the history of the world guaranteeing your defense. Sure. Yeah. And also because they're concerned about the former Soviet Union, which is still Russia. And okay. But I was like, but that wasn't the argument. The argument is, why would we do this? And so I was like, let me just give you 2 bullet points, right? 2 quick arguments. And the 2 quick points that I made were, number 1, the "Nyet means Nyet" memo, which of course, as you know well, you've talked about this a lot. You talked about this back on your Fox News show, was that Bill Burns,
later director of the CIA,
yes, the CIA director through Joe Biden's 4 years, who was the CIA director through this entire war up until Trump took back over.
But then the ambassador to Russia.
In 2008, he was the ambassador to Russia. He wrote a private cable to Condoleezza Rice. This was not for the public. This was a private cable that later the heroic Julian Assange released. It's the only reason we know it exists. And he lays out in there that all this talk about Ukrainian entry to NATO is going to lead to a war. And he specifically says that this is the brightest of all red lines for the Russians. And if we keep moving forward, they fear this could result in civil war, and then they might have to intervene. In his words, quote, a choice the Russians do not want to have to make. So it's like, hey, there's a pretty compelling piece of evidence.
Yes.
And then number two, I said, Stoltenberg, I always say this name wrong, but the head of NATO, Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, he said that Vladimir Putin in late 2001 put in writing, sent a draft treaty to NATO and said, if you just put into writing that you will not bring Ukraine into NATO, I will not invade the country. This is the head of NATO. So I give him these 2 points, okay? I could talk a lot more about this, but I was like, let's focus on these two. Seems to me that all the powerful people involved are admitting that this war was about Ukrainian entry into NATO. And his response was, the war was not about Ukrainian entry into NATO. It was about Vladimir Putin's desires to reconstitute the Soviet Union. And I was like, yeah, but what's the response? Like, what's the response to my point? Like, I made a point. You made nothing. You just made an assertion. So there was this one where it's like, once you actually get down to it, once you remove all this, like, you're an expert, you're not an expert, you've never been, what are you watering? You've got no actual argument here.
Because you're not an expert yourself.
Right. But even that, it's like that, again, just the way I work, that doesn't do anything for me. Then you got to have an actual argument. Otherwise, you're not going to persuade me. And I think for most of the
actual
viewers.
knowledge, too.
Right.
I mean, I just refer back to the boarding school thing. It's like, the whole point of that style in debating is to create the illusion of knowledge. Like,
well,
you have an Aeschylus quote, sort of, you know what I mean? Or you can cite the titles of 3 D.H. Lawrence novels, but you haven't read the novels. You haven't read Aeschylus. You don't actually have
you don't have an original thought that's actually yours.
But you don't even have the material. You haven't even read the books. It's just it's a sleight of hand. And that's what they teach you in boarding school.
Well, so then the other one, which some people did pick up on this, but this to me was like actually the biggest moment of the debate, I thought. And it's sad in a way, because Douglas Murray is someone who I have some degree of respect for as a smart person. And it was kind of sad that he was reduced to this. But so he made the argument. He said, first off, he was dishonest. And I didn't call him, I know this, but I let it slide. But he goes, I was very iffy about the war in Libya. And it's like, I've read your columns at the time. No, you fucking weren't. Okay. Anyway, but he goes, I was very iffy about the war in Libya, but the war in Libya was fought because there was this tremendous fear that Gaddafi was about to go genocidal, and it was a humanitarian intervention. And so then I said, okay.
Now they have slave markets in Tripoli.
Right.
It's humanitarian.
But forget even the point that, okay, maybe their argument is they thought he was going to go genocidal and they didn't realize it would be so much worse without him. Like what? But I said, okay, Douglas, so riddle me this then. If it was a humanitarian intervention, how come I have 4-star General Wesley Clark telling me 10 years prior that we had already made the plans to go overthrow Gaddafi? Because he said this very clearly to Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! And then I mentioned that he later, actually very recently on Piers Morgan, he clarified. This is really interesting. If people go watch it, Scott Horton, who is amazing, by the way. His book Provoked is the best book on Russia, U.S. post-collapse of the Soviet Union relations. His book, Enough Already, is the best book that's been written on the terror wars. So Scott Horton is debating Wesley Clark on Piers Morgan. And this gets brought up. The fact that you said in 2001, you had already seen in the Pentagon that we were going to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years. And, okay, so he goes, well, actually, the plans go back to 1991. And I saw them first from Paul Wolfowitz's office. And then basically the plans got killed. And then they were revived by Richard Pearl and a study paid for by the Israelis. This was 4-star General Wesley Clark's comments on it. So I brought that up. And I go, well, look, you're going to say that this is a humanitarian intervention, but that seems strange because the plans to overthrow Gaddafi were already written many years earlier. And then they had their opportunity and they did it. I think it was more than just a humanitarian intervention. And then his response is this thing about how Paul Wolfowitz's name starts with an animal and ends Jewish. And it was kind of funny the way he said it. But then he went, be careful what you're watering there. Because you can't, a lot of people are going to hate Jews if you just start bringing up Paul Wolfowitz's name. And I just could not believe, by the way, the end result of that is he had no response to what I was saying.
No.
He didn't have a response to why this.
I was watching that shit live, bro. I saw it live. I was thinking, bro, are you going to respond to what Dave is saying? And the way he threw that in there, I was surprised myself. I couldn't believe it.
Paul Wolfowitz has an identifiably Jewish name. You're abetting anti-Semitism by bringing it up, even though he's a government official who helped get us into this war that killed 1 million people.
Yeah, he's also in other places talked about how Paul Wolfowitz is like a hero in the Kurds in Iraq consider him a hero because he was the architect of the war that overthrew Saddam Hussein. But like, I'm not allowed to mention him because which is, first of all, it's just beside the point. Like, forget what this will lead to. What's the truth? That's what matters.
So he's, of course, a very pro-Kurdish, I would imagine.
Right. Yes. I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, I actually have been there.
Oh, have you?
Yes, I have been there. And I can say firsthand, the most brutal people I've ever met in my life were Kurds. Like, actually, I saw it firsthand. So I'm not against the Kurds or whatever, right. But it's just interesting. Everyone in Washington, no one's ever met a Kurd, can't define what a Kurd is. But everyone reflexively loves the Kurds. And I've never had strong views about the Kurds. But again, I just want to say I've seen it in action in Iraq. And I was shocked by the Kurdish behavior personally. Yeah.
Well, also, it was all the people who are, were knocking Donald Trump in his first term when he wanted to pull out of Syria. And they were like, what about the Kurds? We can't betray the Kurds. And then those same people will tell you what a great president George H.W. Bush was. But we can't betray the Kurds, right? There's the guy who really betrayed the Kurds. I mean, told them to rise up against Saddam Hussein and overthrow him, and then decided, we're going to back off of that, and just allowed them to get slaughtered, But, and look, I mean, it was just kind of blatant. It's like, I'm presenting an argument, and you're responding with a pure woke tactic.
Exactly.
A pure woke tactic to say, which as I mentioned to him, I go, but wouldn't this apply to everything you stand for? I mean, everything you stand for about how we shouldn't have so much Muslim immigration into the UK. Okay, well, someone could take that and that might lead to a rise in hatred of Muslim people. But that's not a counter argument.
No.
That's not an argument. That's like, well, okay, well, then maybe you could say you should also add in there, I don't mean all Jewish people are guilty of some conspiracy, but
disclaimer.
First of all, I'm Jewish and he's not. So, like, what the hell are you talking about?
Well, I wouldn't say you're Jewish. So that gets me to, I mean, I don't think you've convinced Douglas that you're Jewish. So
that's true.
I saw that and read the commentary after, and as someone who's always liked Douglas and known him for a while, my first instinct was, wow, he just destroyed his career.
Damn.
Like, he's done. No smart person will ever take Douglas seriously again. And I don't know if he felt that way, but it was clear by a day or two after he realized he destroyed his career. And in response, rather than admitting that and admitting what he'd done wrong, he attacked you, really kind of doubled down in the New York Post. I want to read this because I was offended by this. He goes, the whole column's an attack on you, and I'm quoting, claiming some Jewish ancestry, Smith has spent the last 18 months since October 7th being very unfunny. Indeed. Claiming some Jewish ancestry. Now, I'm not really sure. Well, I'm just going to, I don't know why that just, well, so what, do you claim some Jewish ancestry?
My mom and dad are probably the big ones. I do claim some Jewish ancestry. But yeah, it was so, well, first of all, which I'm not even the first, because everyone made this joke already about the art, but he says, I haven't been funny. And Douglas has never been to one of my comedy shows, so he should come and check it out, and then he could tell me what he thinks. I think I'm pretty damn funny in my shows, and the audience seems to think so. But
what is your Jewish ancestry that you claim? I mean, first of all, he suggests that you're like a fake Jew.
Yeah.
Claiming some Jewish ancestry. It's like you're hiding behind a cloak of ersatz Judaism.
Which is, in a way, one of the things that I thought was so interesting about the piece was that, and I couldn't imagine, man, I hope I'm never this person. Because even now, right, like there's so many shots I could take at Douglas. But even when you ask me about the debate, like my first instinct is to go like, well, look, here are the points I made that he didn't have counters to, because I'm about the argument, like that's what actually matters. And it's tough for all of us because there is, as you know well, you've talked a lot about this, right? But it's like, in this kind of show business news world where we're talking about events and things that matter, but also there's a camera on us and we're talking on a microphone and we're public people. And so it's kind of impossible to completely remove your ego and your own narcissistic tendencies from that.
Yes.
But like, you got to keep reminding yourself like, yeah, but there's a fucking war going on. Like that's what actually matters.
Oh, I know.
All of this is much less important than like the actual policy. So you try to focus on that, but I could not imagine writing an article about a debate that I had just been in where the reaction was so unfavorable toward me. And in the piece, what you might notice is he does not take on a single one of my arguments. He does not point out something that I got wrong. He does not say, Dave argued this, but this is so clearly a reflection of his lack of knowledge on this subject because he didn't account for X, Y, and Z. It's just just like the actual debate, he would only debate me. He wouldn't debate the topic.
So why do you think he did it? I mean, he was basically, it felt to me like he was sent on a kamikaze mission. That's the way it looked. Here, the guy just flies into your aircraft carrier, doesn't sink it, but it destroys his plane, his career. Like, I don't get it.
In a sense, I don't think Douglas Murray destroyed his career. I think he destroyed his reputation. And so his reputation amongst the people, but his career is actually going to be fine. Much like Kamala Harris's career is actually going to be fine.
You're right.
And I don't know, I'm speculating a little bit with this because there was not almost any interaction off the podcast. Like Douglas Murray showed up 5 minutes later, we were recording. He left immediately afterward and me and Rogan hung out. So like, there's nothing more that the viewer didn't see that I saw, really. Hellos and goodbyes. But I think, number one of my guesses, I'm speculating here, is that he just wasn't really prepared for me. And it was like, oh, a comedian will be on there. And maybe he came in kind of confident that like, he'll be able to handle me. I've had that happen a few times in my career. I think it's happening less. I can't imagine he didn't like look into me before the debate, but maybe that's possible. But the feeling that I got as it was going on was kind of, okay, do you remember, I'm sure you do. You remember very well when Kamala Harris was running for president.
Yes.
I know that seems like a long time ago, but that actually happened, which is really crazy.
It's like a dream sequence.
Now, it's not just that Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney endorsed her, but she started bringing Liz Cheney out to campaign events and campaigning with Liz Cheney. Now, if you were just looking at this on paper, you'd go, okay, what demographic of voters is this for?
Warmongers.
And you'd very quickly realize that demographic doesn't exist.
Yeah.
No.
Are the leftists, they still remember her last name is Cheney. And especially with the year that had preceded that, like, they're kind of anti-war again. And they're not really into like the idea of we've got a Cheney on our side. It's not going to win you. It's not going to get out your base. And then on the other side, I mean, she lost by like 50 points in her congressional run. I mean, it's not like you're bringing Republicans in. And so I think the only thing you could conclude is that, oh, this isn't actually for the voters. There's somebody else who Kamala Harris is.
The military industrial estate, or whatever they call them. The warmongers, the war hawks, the people that are for war. Those are the people
Talking to here.
Of course.
There's a power source that may be a little concerned about her, and she's trying to let them know, don't worry, I'm good for business. I've got Liz Cheney right here. That's kind of my assumption. It seemed to me with the Douglas Murray thing, he wasn't playing to the audience. He certainly wasn't trying to persuade Joe.
No.
He perhaps was talking to a different audience,
Clearly.
which will make sure that his career is just fine going forward. That's the sense I got.
If you want to make people paranoid and hateful, act like that.
Well, again, look, there's two things that I really want to make sure I express. Number one, with the thing where he's this claims some Jewish ancestry thing, which by the way would be, I think, if you were to ever do this to say like a Jewish person who was on your side, you would be like, well, that's a pretty anti-Semitic thing to do, right? To like challenge their Jewishness because they disagree with a policy. But
what does your Jewishness have to do with it anyway?
Well, right. That's the whole fucking point. And that, it does. I think it's basically like this. I think that particularly when it comes to the Israel stuff, a lot of these guys don't know what to do with me because typically, as every American who's ever criticized Israel knows, you get labeled as being a Jew hater. You must be anti-Semitic. That's why you would say something like that. Like, remember that horrible anti-Semite Pat Buchanan who said that the Israel lobby wanted a war in Iraq? She just hates Jewish people. Like, even though we all know that's true, when you say it, they go, you're an anti-Semite. That's like the game that they play. That's much tougher to do when you're talking to someone who's Jewish. And so in a sense,
and honestly, it's not just Jewish people that do that. You also see that in the black community as well. If you try to criticize a black person that have done something wrong, right? And if they know that they don't have no argument, they just call you a racist. They do that. I see that all the time. I don't think it's a good thing to do, but he's absolutely right. You go, I mean, the people in the Jewish community, the Zionists or whatever you call them, they do the same thing. You get me? If you see Rabbi Shmuley, every single thing, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew, hating everything. Nah, just shut up, man.
That ends up being kind of a shield against the accusation, and so they want to remove that shield so that you don't have. But the bottom line is that no one should have that shield. And I am Jewish. My mother and father are both Jewish. I think I was 86% Ashkenazi Jew on my DNA test. I think that's enough. But the point is, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter at all. Anybody.
We're talking about the behavior of nations, by the way. Nations with militaries and parliaments, congresses. Like, these are countries. And what does this have to do? I mean,
well, first of all, and this isn't even the most important point, but the American taxpayer is forced to pay for this stuff.
Aware.
So, but even if you didn't have to pay for it, if you're a human being, forget even an American, if you're a human being, you have a right to have an opinion on any issue you want to have an opinion on.
This is what the left did during COVID. Yeah. It was like, wait a second. It seems like you're telling me it came from a pangolin in a wet market, a fish market, a mammal sold in a fish market, somehow, was the genesis of this virus. But there was this level 3 biolab like a mile away. Maybe that was the source. They're like, you hate Asians.
Right,
And they claimed racism, so you couldn't pursue that line of inquiry. I see people like Douglas Murray, supposedly on the right, and there are a lot of others like Douglas Murray, saying the same thing. Like, you can't express an opinion about where your tax dollars go or about people dying, or else you're a bigot. How is that different?
Right. No, it's not. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of pathetic tactic where if you can't argue against someone's ideas, you just say, oh, you're a bad person. And that's why you have these ideas to begin with. It's a very low grade, like, social psychology attempt to shame someone out of having the views that they have. It's what the woke did on everything. No matter what it was. Anytime I can't remember who coined the term, but is a racist is anybody winning an argument against a progressive.
Exactly.
That's it. And so he's doing the same thing. But then the other thing, which is really separate and secondary from that, but the argument that Douglas Murray is making is that if I call out Paul Wolfowitz, or even, more broadly speaking, if I call out the neoconservatives and how they hijacked American foreign policy and how they very much had Israel's interest in mind, which I get from reading the neoconservatives. I don't get this from reading critics of them. It's from in their own words.
Right.
He's saying me calling that out is fertile ground for Jew hatred to rise. And it's like, no. What you're doing is fertile ground.
I agree with that.
What you telling me I'm not allowed to call out the deputy defense secretary because his last name is Jewish, that's actually what leads to a rise in people not liking Jews.
I couldn't agree more. And I do think Douglas, though he's not an expert or a genius, is smart enough to understand that, but he did it anyway.
Yeah.
And I don't know his motive, but in the moment that I think made me actually turn it off. I had to stop watching. But it was most revealing of all is when he goes after Daryl Cooper, the historian, really one of the great historians in the United States, Daryl Cooper, and doesn't know his name.
Yeah.
But goes after him personally as like a Nazi or something. And let me just parenthetically, and I'll shut up after this, but
listen, they washed Douglas Murray, man, throughout this interview. For the first 45 minutes or so, they just ran through him. You get what I'm saying? And it was a very good conversation because he got exposed, man, and the likes of him. You get what I mean? Because we need to eradicate this problem of censorship. We need to eradicate this problem that we have been accusing the people on the left, the woke left. We have to eradicate that problem because it is slowly but surely, sipping into the right now, and we don't want that. Everyone should be able to have a conversation. Everyone should be able to criticize people if they do anything wrong. We should not stand for censorship at all. You get what I'm saying? But go check out the episode, and as you do so, like this video, leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel. It's your boy Toby. Until next time, salute.